Welcome to Procurement Basics. This was originally presented as Procurement Basics 101 in 2014. It has been updated to reflect recent USDA guidance. I'm Kathryn Hodges from the Department of Education, Office of Nutrition Programs and Services. During this webinar, I will define procurement, touch on procurement regulations, talk about various procurement methods, define small purchase thresholds, stress good procurement principles and practices, stress the importance of detailed specifications, and provide a list of prohibitive procurement practices. Procurement refers to the purchasing of goods and services. Any item or service purchased for any amount must follow the relevant procurement regulations. This is applicable to all meals programs. Why is proper procurement important? Federal law requires all purchases made out of the nonprofit school food service account follow federal procurement regulations. Why? Because we want to ensure that taxpayer dollars are used in the most efficient way possible. In the simplest terms, a well-run procurement process ensures fair and open competition. If vendors know there will be competition, they are more likely to give a lower price or a better product, rather than risk not making the sale. This saves your program money. There are many steps in the procurement process, and it often does not end once the item is received or the service is performed. Thus, it is a process and not an event. Federal regulations require that every purchase made out of the nonprofit food service account be made using a procurement process, no matter how small the purchase is. The regulations do set out a different process for micro, small, and large purchases. Purchases under the small purchase threshold can follow the informal procurement method, which is simpler, but it is still a procurement process that must be followed. We will talk more in a bit about the informal and formal procurement methods. But first, let's talk about what the regulations are. Procurement regulations flow from federal to state to local. You should follow the strictest regulations that apply to you. If local or state regulations conflict with federal regulations, follow the federal regulations. 2 CFR 200 requires that any entity that receives federal funding have a procurement code of conduct and written procurement procedures in place. The Procurement Code of Conduct identifies the ethics that surround your procurement process. The written procurement procedures details how you go about procuring. It should be detailed enough that any reasonable person off the street could pick up the written procurement procedures and procure on your behalf. The small purchase threshold is set first by the federal government. A state may issue a lower threshold. The local government, county or city, town, or school district may issue an even lower threshold. It is important to recognize that the threshold used is the most restrictive one, the lowest. Since the state of New Hampshire has not set a state small purchase threshold for non-state entities to follow, you may use the federal threshold of $250,000 unless your local government has set a lower one. No matter which procurement method is used, no matter if the purchase is over or under the small purchase threshold, the purchase must be competitive. However, if you are using the micro purchase opportunity, you may just go out and purchase without any need for quotes or bids. The caveat is that, if any like purchases are made in the future, you must show that you spread your micro purchases equitably around to all available and responsible vendors. If the purchase is under your small purchase threshold, you may still use the formal procurement method option. You cannot arbitrarily break up your purchase into smaller pieces to fall under the small purchase threshold, but you can break up your purchase if you have a good reason. For example, breaking up your apple purchases from your citrus purchases because there are many local vendors who can bid on apples, but only one or two produce wholesalers who would bid on both apples and citrus. In this case, you'd be increasing competition in your apple purchase and hopefully getting a lower price because of the increased competition. Or if you only need lots of carrots in October for a harvest of the month menu, but you don't normally serve a lot of carrots, you could separate the carrots you need in October into their own purchase and then conduct a separate procurement process for supplying all the rest of your produce during the rest of the school year. However, USDA does allow you to break up your purchase to allow small, minority, or women-owned businesses to participate. These types of businesses are often small and can provide excellent goods and services, just not in a large quantity. So breaking up the procurement into smaller solicitations can allow them to be considered responsive vendors. Soliciting bids. You can also use prices found online, in catalogs, sell flyers, at the grocery store or farmer's market, etc. You can choose which vendors to call or which places to look for prices as long as you find an adequate number. Federal regulations generally means 3, or other numbers specified by state or local regulations. In the informal procurement method, you do not need to publish an announcement or invitation to bid. You approach the vendor, unless otherwise specified by state or local regs. It's important that all the prices are for the same thing listed in your specification. If you talk to or write to vendors, make sure that you tell each vendor the same requirements. Don't ask one for orange carrots and one for multicolored carrots, or tell one that you need Tuesday delivery and tell another that any day will work. These differences in specifications could affect their price or ability to bid on your business. Bid documentation. Many of you already check prices in several different places before making a purchase, but if you're not documenting that, you're not following the regulation. For the smaller schools or organizations that will never need the formal procurement method, or that buy from the local grocery stores, I would suggest you create a shopping list of what you typically purchase in a month. Go on a road trip to at least 3 different grocery stores or chains and write down the price for each item on the list. If you do this a couple of times a year, fall and spring or winter and summer, you would satisfy the need to go out to bid. Just make sure you document everything. This may also open your eyes. Are you really getting the biggest bang for your buck currently? Please refer to USDA Guidance Memo SP 04-2018 for further understanding on market basket analysis. You'll see these 5 steps appear again and again in future procurement trainings. You'll want to get acquainted with them. These are the basic steps when using the formal procurement process: planning, writing specifications, advertising the procurement, awarding a contract, and managing the contract. The next few slides will provide more information on each of these good procurement principles. The more vendors that are competing for your business, the lower the price will potentially be. Fair and open competition guarantees that competition leads to the acquisition of higher quality goods and services at the lowest possible price. All suppliers are playing on a level playing field, and all have the same opportunity to compete for your business. The area of fairness and integrity would include guidelines around code of conduct, policies, and procedures for procurement. A proper procurement code of conduct policy would help employees avoid real or perceived conflicts of interest in the procurement process. A procurement code of conduct is required and must be followed, even if all your purchases fall under your small purchase threshold, or if you are using the micro purchase threshold. Your school district, or supervisory union likely already has a purchasing code of conduct in place for purchasing books, school buses, computers, etc. Check with your business administrator to see. If so, you can just begin following that code for your school food service purchases. Just liking a company better is not a good enough reason to go with them. But if your specs require a certain level of customer service, say delivery on Tuesdays before 10 a.m., have live telephone support 9 to 5, etc., then you can eliminate companies that don't meet those requirements. Just make sure that these requirements and specs are really worth paying more for. Responsive contractors are those whose products or services meet your specifications. Responsible contractors are those who can and will successfully fulfill the terms and conditions of the proposed procurement. You may look back on past purchases to evaluate vendors. If a past vendor did not hold up their end of the bargain, then you can consider them a non-responsible vendor. You are not required to contact them or award further contracts to them, but make sure you have documentation to support all your decisions. Did the company agree to supply you with high-quality fresh produce last year and then delivered significant amounts of rotten produce? Then that company is not responsible because they have a poor record of past performance. If at any point you feel uncomfortable about how something is being done, then step back and evaluate the situation. Transparency means that everything done by the School Food Authority must be clear, above board, and out in the open. Good procurement practices require that you identify what you truly need to purchase. Make sure that all purchases meet the RAND test: reasonable, allowable, necessary. Identify how you need to advertise and where to get as many respondents as possible, and prepare detailed specifications of exactly what you plan to purchase. If you are planning on evaluating the responses, you will need to use evaluation criteria that are not restrictive. Price should always receive the highest points in your evaluation scoring matrix. Your specifications should never be so restrictive that only one vendor can meet your needs. Publicize the solicitation appropriately to the widest possible audience. Allow adequate time for respondents to prepare responsive bids or proposals. Ensure transparency in the opening and evaluating of bids and proposals, and document the entire process. Why are specifications important? They clearly state what you are looking to purchase. Everyone bids on the exact same items. They are preparing their bids, quotes, or proposals on a level playing field, and it allows you to articulate your needs. Here are just a few areas where you can specify what you want: the product name or variety, the grade, the size, the quantity, quality, cleanliness, packaging, delivery, food safety, farm practices, and characteristics. Just as a heads up, if you want to buy locally, you would define what local means to you. You can add your geographic preference to your specification. However, the term geographic preference is not a spec in and of itself, but only a preference. It cannot stop those vendors from outside your defined geographical area from submitting a bid or quote. Now we're going to get into the prohibitive practices. There's going to be a lot of don'ts. Don't arbitrarily divide the purchase in order to bring the amount of the procurement under the small purchase threshold. Don't award a contract without advertising the solicitation unless you can justify a sole source or non-competitive situation due to an emergency. Don't negotiate with one firm prior to evaluating all proposals, or negotiate with any bidder at any time when competitive sealed bid procurement is used. Don't award a contract on the basis of only one of the elements in the solicitation. Don't seek price quotes from only one source under small purchase procedures when more than one source is available. Don't contact only suppliers that are related or affiliated with one another. Don't provide only certain firms with the results of pre-bid meetings or answers to bids or proposal questions. Don't allow potential contractors to draft procurement terms and/or specifications. Don't release the contents of a bid or proposal to other respondents prior to public bid opening or proposal evaluation. Don't use outdated pre-qualified lists. Don't use lists that were developed without full and open competition. And don't allow changes after the contract is awarded that may have affected the award if other vendors had known and had had the opportunity to respond to the new provision. Please feel free to contact the Office of Nutrition Programs and Services with any questions. Thank you for your time.